Hey everybody, it's Ed Thompson coming to you from my living room in Greensboro, North Carolina. For some of you who may not know, I work with Single Purpose Ministries, and it is a ministry concerned with relationships between us and God, between one another, people to people. And then finally, today even, we're going to talk about connecting internally with ourselves. And I am going to share with you a little bit about the positive and negative parts of my life where the connections were either very painful or the connections became very joyous. And in the e-blast, if you've already read it today, and I hope you have, I basically covered part one of my life whereby Ed Thompson was certainly hurting. I didn't like myself. And I called myself names that kept me back, that imprinted lies within me. So I wasn't about to think about the things I do today. And we're going to talk about what those are. So I guess you could call this from setbacks to comebacks. And I'm going right now to the turning point, and then I'm moving into the part two. And then finally, I'm going to finish up with a little practice that I do every day that keeps me from going back into the lying and deceiving of myself, and a lot of hurt that I piled on myself is no more. Here we go. Turning point. I was 34 years old. I think I've told you a little bit of this before, but people began to tell me about something called the gospel. It happened to be at a time when I was very down on myself, 1987 to be exact. And not only did I not like myself, I think I was at my lowest point. I even mentioned some things in the e-blast that certainly prove that I was not healthy. And then a couple of men came into my life one day in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they shared the gospel of Jesus Christ. They told me why, by following it, I truly could live, learn, love, even laugh with a new sense of purpose and a sense of joy that truly, folks, I have now and had no idea before that in my life. So I want to cover just a little bit of what's come out of the learning portion of my faith journey and why I want to help others do likewise. And to see people like me have setbacks, but then they rely on God, God's people, wonderful truth from the Bible, and other things that help them see that this world is so much more than what they ever thought it was before. So here I am, quickly enumerating or listing the things that gave me hope. I've already mentioned the Bible, the Lord Himself, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus Christ and His death on a cross. And that's the main things right there. The essentials I talked about last week. But what else? Well, I was very fortunate to have a few men's ministries and some pretty good counseling. I found out I needed some counseling over the years since 1987. And I am going to bear down now on a wonderful ministry called Marked Men for Christ. And I happen to have the shirt on today, Marked Men for Christ. Marked by whom? By the Holy Spirit. And I went to one of their retreats. And the last thing this is a retreat that the marked men have. It's an event that goes from start to finish with no breaks in between. It is absolutely challenging, but it's rewarding because we dealt with the main things. This happened to be for me 5 years ago. I was coming off of my second divorce, one of the great pains of my life. And the men at Marked Men could see how much I was hurting. And they helped me during the event, and they've helped me after the event from 5 years ago till now, I meet with other marked men every week, and we talk in a small group about our wounds. And now let me talk about how I changed from setbacks to comebacks in the area of my wounds, where my fear, my shame, and my anger began to diminish because I was able to tell and relate and show other men that I was in a bad spot, but I could be healed. In fact, that's what they showed me. So we've got here pain on one side, healing that I never even knew existed on the other side. Folks, let me mention the other wounds that they work on at the event before they send you back to your town and you get in a small group. The one that men I see a lot of, guess what, in me, is deceit and denial. Men deceive themselves. They play roles, they pose, they look good, but underneath, that's not really happening. They're not connected the way I've been talking. So what happens? Well, a lot of things. Anger can arise, which is wound number 2 that I'm mentioning. What else? Fear. Oh my, is 2020 got a lot of men fearful? Women too. Oh yes, lots of fear wounds around today. What else? Sadness and sorrow. I'm not sure I've ever come to grips with some people who have died while I've been living, but I never forgave them or they never forgave me. We never settled the score, and it's left me very sad and sorrowful that I was unable to forgive them. But beyond the sadness and sorrow wound, finally comes the shame wound. I mentioned today in the e-blast a song by the Police called King of Pain. I used to call myself that. Now I look back and I might be the king of shame. At least I was. I got home. I'm going to tell you how the shame began to diminish, and I felt myself growing and healing in a new and positive way. In other words, I was on the comeback trail, and the setbacks that caused this shame weren't nearly as effective at bringing me down or telling me untruths, because I'm learning to tell myself the truth. So I'm going to show you that there is a practice that I do that these marked men taught me. And I've mentioned these wounds, and I've had them all. I still deal with them. Let's make that clear. But let's put Ed Thompson's hands up and close to the screen. And folks, here's what happens with men. You see these hands? Some men do one of 3 things. Number 1, they have the anger, they have the fear and the shame, and they grab and they close those hands, hold on tight, and they put them behind them. And what that does is stuff it down. Do you think that those wounds show themselves over the years? And not only that, but they began to erupt in places that we men never thought would happen. And in other words, these held down wounds that are not healing are beginning to bubble and burst within us. Number 2, what do men do? Well, I talk with a lot of men over the years. They do this. They like to look at their wounds and tell anybody who will hear why they're hurting so bad. So they stay covered up with the wounds in front of them, but they never think about working on them, going to one of these small groups we call P3s and get help for those wounds. So they leave them up here, and that's man number 2. Ed Thompson is showing you now the 3rd way. This is the practice that I practice to keep from lying to myself. And that is this. I open them up. I tell the men, and in appropriate places, I don't go around telling everybody, but I show them what I'm dealing with and what I'm hurting from. And those men are willing. Ed, which would you like to work on today? And with that, I have men who care and men who relate. And they tell me, Ed Thompson, let's let you have the floor and let's work some of this out of you. And healing occurs, sometimes more than less, but it's wonderful. And once again, the marked men that I'm telling you about, and they are meeting in Western Carolina, November 6th, 7th, and 8th. You can go online, mmfc.org, or perhaps even Marked Men for Christ, all one word, .org. And just zoom around it. In other words, cruise that site. And if God moves you to sign up for that Western Carolina event, then do so. Folks, I'm going to close now. You heard that I have connected with the old Ed, connected with the new, and now living in the new. And it can happen to you too. So call me and just know, once again, I love you all. I need to hear comments if you have them. And I want to say, by God's grace, I'll see you next week on Election Day. Take care. Love you.